Right, so here we are back live in London, close to the River Thames. It's a very different route here today. Lots of residential districts. You can see tower blocks. We're going to go through in a minute. There's people on the balconies clapping and cheering. There's people on bridges waving and cheering along. Clearly the message is being received. So the march continues. It's a part of London that I don't think I've ever walked. I couldn't tell you where we were, but I had to make my way home. But the plan, I think, is to raise awareness amongst these residential areas, to connect with local citizens, to raise the message in different parts of the city. You'll see behind me these police officers. Peace officers. Very good. You can hear the drums, so clearly near the front.
That's the point I was trying to make. I turned my 80,000 word book into a 10-minute poem. Can I send it to you? Yeah, is that right? I'll WhatsApp it to you.
Yeah, please.
Awesome. Yeah, you're doing a great job, man, honestly. Fabulous. Airdropping, yeah, let's see. Can I grab it on WhatsApp? Seemingly not. Oh, I like, maybe try that. But I would like to make a little video for it because it says that it tells the whole story. I'm a writer, musician, songwriter, poet, and so I've summed it up into this 10-minute poem. But it's essentially 80,000 word book. That's just.
I'd love to see both. Can you send me the book as well?
I can send you the book. Yeah, it's very spiritual. The book.
That's good.
From a very spiritual perspective.
What we need.
Yeah. How do I send that to you?
Same way.
Oh, from the airdrop?
Yeah.
I don't have a book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Email address.
Yeah, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's going to be boys, be on there. It's going to be fun.
Do you have a boy?
Boy, yeah.
Boys, all good?
Very good, yeah. Ended up in an emergency C-section, but it's all healthy.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I will send it to you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, as I say, I think we've, maybe not, I don't know, it's there anyway. It's a great log of information about what happened and what went on, and I was logging it all last year, sitting there thinking this is fucking bullshit, and logging it, and then I realised that this is spiritual war that's being played out, well, which was what I was expecting to happen,
Yes.
and before I knew it, I was in it. I'm actually, I'm shouting that, I'm start writing novel on the same post
It's inspired your creativity.
Sorry?
It's great, this inspired your creativity.
Yeah, well, we're all doing our bit, isn't it? Really yours is more of a documentary, sort of a news kind of perspective, and mine is the creative
Absolutely.
perspective, yeah, for sure.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah. Right, anyway, it's a pleasure, Dan. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, yeah.
Liam, my name is Liam.
Nice to meet you, Liam.
Yeah, keep going, brother, because we're certainly a major part of what's happening.
Just getting started. Just going to start doubling down on it. I've got to increase our reach. I'm going to get smart with our creativity.
How do you do that then?
Shorter videos, answering very specific questions. We get some different voices, different hosts, different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Use some different types of marketing, some paid ads. We're going to really try and get the message out there. Work with other influencers. Just got to find different ways to share the message.
I think also the message needs to be sent out about how this collective create and continue to have contact.
Yes.
Because we've passed the point of no return on many aspects of this journey already.
Yes.
When the time arises, if the internet switched off, or whatever may happen, or the financial system imposed, whatever they've got,
I've got to catch up with Richard.
Okay, brilliant.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Dan, how's it going?
Good, how you doing?
You're doing a live stream?
Yeah, just capturing. We're at the back now.
Is there audio?
Yes.
So you can hear us?
Yes.
Okay, the world can hear us.
So welcome here. That's it.
I seem to have mislaid a few people that I've been looking for.
I've mislaid everyone. Yeah. Yeah.
Lawrence Fox, supposed to be shadowing. That seems to have gone out the window.
Yeah. We're at the back now. I'm going to start making my way to the front.
Oh yeah.
So we're at the back of the march here, down at 9 Elms Station, another place I've never visited. Again, I think the purpose of this march is to get us in Vauxhall, to get into the areas where, you know, people perhaps haven't had a chance to connect with the movement, to expand into different people. There's people I can see it now, just on the streets, taking leaflets, taking banners, taking stock of what's going on. You know, as I spoke about earlier today, one of the most powerful things about protests is about raising awareness. Not only public awareness, but also political awareness. I think a lot of people have false expectations about what protests actually achieve. You know, there's a lot of high stakes. There's Leslie. There's a high stakes game, but the reality is, you know, protests are only part of the solution in raising awareness and helping to get the word out politically, publicly, as part of a broader campaign. You know, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of work to create political change, and it takes time and it takes patience. But you know, there's some pressing issues right now which are immediate and urgent that we've heard people talk about here today. We've seen the placards and the banners. People want urgent action now because this is real time, which is true. And it takes a multitude of approaches in order to tackle some of those real time urgent issues. That's protests, campaigns, boycotts, strikes, other forms of direct action. There's a whole range of things that people can do to help create change. But really, this is the basis of long-term change. A lot of the people here aren't just talking about the present moment issues. They are talking about the long term and how we actually create political change, social change, and create the conditions for a better world. You know, there's so many misconceptions about the types of movement here. I know already you can predict the headlines. You know, quote me on this on Monday, you know, or tonight or tomorrow. It'll all be the standard anti-vax smearing. You know, almost as though there is. What I do not understand about this anti-vax smearing that we see in the press is there's real no concession that there's clearly a problem. You know, there's clearly a problem. You know, every medical product comes with imperfections. We know that. But the amount of adverse reactions that we've seen with these particular products compared to similar products is astronomical. And that's not just a function of the volume that has been administered, but the way the press talk about this as though it's not an issue. But even in the FDA, there was the FDA conference talking about the boosters. You know, fortunately now, finally, doctors and scientists are actually raising these issues, which gives legitimate. Sadly, it takes that legitimization to lend credence to the argument. But as always, this group of people here will be misrepresented. And of course, there are some people who have more extreme or fringe views. Of course, every subject is always that. But the main basis of the argument is, you know, that there are questions that are unanswered, information is being suppressed, people are being censored, the critical voices around the scientific process, the scientific protocols have fallen short. And it's not good enough. It's not good enough when now you're exposing children to that particular intervention. So, you know, the press can say what they will. To me, it's cowardly journalism. It's the highest form of yellow journalism. But ultimately, we have to look at how the media operates in the new world, in the modern world, and where it's funded and how it's owned and structured. And you know, the news is not about reporting the news; it's about creating the news. And by virtue of that, they can create whatever story they want. We've seen this week with the hysteria in the UK around the fuel crisis, and as a result, you know, just putting a headline, "There's no need to panic buy." What happens? Everyone panic buys. Hysteria, fear. You know, then that's the media stoking the news. You know, it's creating the news. You know, and, I was working in financial services during the last major recession, and again, if the media hadn't existed, then that whole recession may have been, in my view, I think could have been avoided. It could have been contained, it could have been dealt with. But of course, the media is part of the problem. And, I think this is an opportunity, really, when we look at what's going on here, it's very clear what some of the problems are. But as I talked about earlier, we need to now look at practical solutions. And, there is no single solution. There's a multitude of problems that we need to fix. And to me, reinventing the media, innovating in the media space is essential. It's essential to bring ethical journalism, rather than this partisan type approach, which essentially divides the people, pits us versus them, and it just creates greater polarity when, really in order to heal the problems that the world is facing, not only now but historical problems and future problems that we're going to face, requires greater unity of humanity. We need to come together, but this divisive force of the media is a damaging force, and it's really changed over recent decades. As the business, as like many industries, they've sometimes struggled to adapt to new technology, and media has become more and more sensationalistic in order to get attention, to sell more advertising. But it's not necessarily a reflection of what's really happening. And we see little nuggets, little drip feeds of information coming through in the media around some of the critical points, but that story rarely stacks. So, when the media wrote recently about the specific issues around the hospitalisation data surrounding COVID, for instance, where one of the papers reports, I think, between 40 and 50% of the COVID hospitalisation data is people that do not have the virus, they're being treated for other things. It doesn't stack from there into, okay, well, what else could be wrong? What else could be problematic? And as I spoke about earlier, one of the biggest challenges we have right now is a complete lack of transparency. Now, whatever you feel about this protest or the issues that people are standing up for, the reality is without transparency, without accuracy of data and information, it becomes impossible to make clear decisions, either on a personal level or on a societal level or a political level. So we have to ask ourselves, without that clarity, without that accurate information, then how are we basing decisions? And many of those who have been looking at this situation as I have recognise that a lot of the problems, a lot of the political issues that we're seeing risen are ideological. It's based upon emotion, platitudes, rather than actual fact. And as a result of that, we're in this kind of predicament where people in their thousands and their droves take to the streets to voice their dissatisfaction, and it's simply not good enough. So one of the things that I'll be looking to take from here in the next iteration of the Pandemic Podcast is to be asking those big questions, but not only asking those big questions, as we've begun to do with our interviews this week, looking at take a helicopter view of the different psychological principles, why people can't see beyond the mainstream narrative, why people comply, all of these things, looking at these psychological drivers to understand the mechanics of why situations like this emerge, so people can start to see their role in that position. But more broadly, we do need to be placing the burden of proof of these big questions on the politicians, on the scientists, because the longer they go unanswered, the longer we face this problem. Now, for those at home who don't necessarily see the issues that we see here, rarely is it that data or analytics is going to shift people's perspective, particularly when it's being censored. So that burden needs to be placed upon the politicians, the scientists, the academics, to say that we need clarity here, because when that clarity is confirmed by, if it's confirmed by those people, people in power, then it really does create a wedge, because it does begin to dissolve the narrative. And we need to involve our MPs in that. We need to involve all the different stakeholders, industry, and demand that accurate information. And there's lots of information that simply is not collected. I've spoken to my MP on a local level. I've spoken to the local authorities. Certain key information that you would want to have in order to understand the burden of the virus, for instance, and the burden on the local economy. Information is just not available. It's not being collected. Some of it's withheld, but a lot of it's not even collected. So in order to us really move beyond this, we've got to get to that level of clarity first and foremost. And when it comes to really understanding the predicament we're in. As a leader of a business myself, that's the sort of information I'd want. I'd want to understand exactly what are the metrics in order to be able to make proper decisions. And we're in a place where decisions aren't being made on facts, and maybe that's by design. Some people will certainly argue that it is by design. You know, because you've got this veil of mystery, this mystique that's created by a lack of transparency. And where there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of accountability, because how can you hold someone to account when you've got no transparency? You know, so is that by design? Well, maybe. Which comes back to the guiding question, you know, solve the political problem. And to me, there's only one simple answer to that, is that we need political reform. You know, we live in a world now full of digital technology where, you know, people's ability to access information and to make decisions is more abundant than any other time in history. So everyone should be able to play a role in participating digitally in change when it comes to political decision making. Now, it doesn't mean that we want, you know, a vote every 5 minutes on every particular issue, decision by committee, expanded out to the nation. No, but we do need some way of representing the interests of the people. But again, we've seen the challenges. We've discussed some of the challenges of that today around informed consent as an issue. How do you ensure that people have got proper, accurate information to make a decision? I've talked here about the data and there being a lack of transparency there. But it's beyond the data. We've also got, you know, vested interests where there is, you know, behavioural science used and coercive practices, behavioural manipulation to make people's perception, to lead people's perception in a certain way. Because our beliefs, our perception of the world becomes our reality, and what most people don't realise is that that's unconsciously programmed, you know, by the sources that we consume. You know, if you're watching the BBC every single day, then that becomes your reality of the situation of the world. But if you look beyond that and you start to look at other sources, you see that there's often, you know, there's far more than two sides to the story. And I always say that there's not just two sides to a coin. You take the circumference, it's infinity. There's infinite possibilities. So until we start to question everything, which is the subtitle of this podcast and the title of one of my brands, then how do we actually get to that truth? So it starts by asking quality questions. The better quality questions we ask, the better answers we create. Whether we're trying to define the problem or define the solution, the better quality questions we ask, the better quality definitions and answers we can come up with. So, to recap, I'm here in London, walking through the streets with thousands of people, pretty close to the beginning of the front of the march now, getting into some green area. I think we're coming up to the end of this part of the march. I think people's legs are getting tired. You can sense the energy. I don't know if you can sense it digitally, but people are more subdued now. We've been walking for a while. Hey! There we go. Everyone's come around again. Rejuvenated by the donkey of the horn. But yeah, it's been a good day out, good exercise. And hopefully sending a message to the public around us who are clearly responding positively. Again, people honking their horns. Brilliant to see in support. People on the streets taking flyers and filming the protest and taking photos. So really starting to reach into different communities, which is the benefit of taking a march like this into different parts of the city. You know, historically, we've walked through the centre of London, through Oxford Street and the major shopping streets, but today we are taking to the more community areas. And as a result, reaching into new areas. And it's quite when we do this, it's enabling different parts of the society, different parts of the community to recognise that if they've been sceptical of the situation, and typically you'll find in a situation like this, as Professor Matthias Desmet said this week on the interview, you find there's about 40% of people who are kind of silent majority amongst the, when you include the critics, and 30% of the critics take up to 70%. You'll find that that silent group can become activated when they see things like this, recognise they're not alone and that there is a way that they can contribute too. So, you know, I've talked extensively throughout today about the power of protest. And, you know, for those of you watching from home, and I appreciate we've got people from all over the UK, all over the world watching, find a way to get involved, find a way to become active. And you don't have to go to the protests. You can join campaign groups, you can sign letters, petitions. You can sign the Together Declaration at togetherdeclaration.org to voice your support for saying no to vaccine passports, for instance. There's all kinds of ways that people can get involved. And protesting, as I've stated, is one part of that change process. For many people who attend a protest for the first time, that's the beginning of a journey for them, stepping into their power, finding their courage. So if you've never been to a protest before, like myself up until last year, it was close to this time last year, summer last year, May, June last year, that I went to my first protest. And I haven't looked back, continued to speak out and step out and encourage others to do the same, because without your support, we cannot move the needle on this. We cannot influence the dials. But I do believe we are starting to reach a tipping point. You know, those pillars of society, business, industry, religious leaders, starting to come forward and say enough's enough. We've seen some major US celebrities and influencers speaking their minds. And when that happens, again, it empowers others to recognize that they're not alone. So there's all kinds of ways to raise awareness. And I've always said that change itself begins with awareness. Awareness is the first step to change. So here we are raising awareness in the streets of London. How can you help us raise awareness? Well, you can start by sharing this feed. Please do hit the share button, whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Odyssey, wherever you're tuning in. Put the links on the Telegram groups that you're part of, so those people at home can continue being part of the protest virtually from home. You can check out our episodes on the Pandemic Podcast. We've done over 300 episodes now in the last 12 months and beyond. Daily broadcasts, examining the issues, bringing you world-class expertise and guests to the show. There's all kinds of ways you can become informed and educated about the issues that we're here campaigning for live in the streets today. There's people I've spoken here today for the first time, they're joining the protest for the first time. And again, it's for them, there's a line that they won't cross. And for lots of people, many of the issues that have come up currently today is the issues around childhood vaccinations. And it's a sad state of affairs that I can't really go into depth on the issues around that due to the censorship pressures that big tech, social media put on broadcasts like this. We can't go into the depths. It just simply gets blocked, censored, removed, deleted. But quite clearly, to summarise just the headline publicly available information, it's clear that the JCVI in the UK are responsible for approving the vaccines. Rejected the vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds, and they placed that decision back in the hands of the politicians. And lo and behold, as expected, Chief Medical Officer and his colleagues overrode that decision. And as a result of overriding that decision now, despite against the advice of the JCVI, these products are now being rolled out in schools. And yeah, it's really sad. We've seen people, adults, have severe adverse reactions and lose their lives. And now we're subjecting children to that when their risks to the underlying condition of coronavirus is infinitesimally small. Yes, there's always exceptions and people are concerned, etc. But we've lost all perspective of risk and benefit. And a lot of people here are really concerned about that. There's so many concerned parents here who are desperately worried for their children. I've spoken to a number of people who haven't sent their kids back to school, and ultimately who's suffering at the end of this is the children, their education, their social lives. They're getting caught up and played like a pawn in the middle of this. And I, for one, as a new father, will not stand for that. And, we need to get out of fear, we need to restore sanity, we need to come back to conscious equilibrium, conscious awareness, and say, look, what are we doing? What are we doing? And this is not tenable, this is not sustainable. And enough's enough. So, a lot of people here supporting those issues, as well as many others, vaccine passports, and a lot of preemptive approaches here for future lockdowns and other restrictions. Again, there's people on the sides of the street here celebrating with us, joining in, filming different parts of London here now, Wandsworth Road, engaging with the protests really peacefully, which is wonderful to see so much support from the public. And that's again the benefit of coming through these community areas, is it engages local people. And I think what's really important is it's great to have these big London events where thousands and thousands of people come together, but this is something that needs to be taken back to our own communities and to build local support, because it's all very well coming and feeling united amongst hundreds of thousands of people at times. But people can feel very alone and isolated in their own towns, in their own villages, in their own cities. So accordingly, it's really important that the energy that people take from here, they take back to their hometowns, their home areas, and start to form connections, start to spread the word, because again, momentum can be built from this. And then once you spread that message out to local communities, then you really do start to build the movement, and these bigger events get bigger and bigger. So we're at a point in history now where we're at a crossroad in the roads, and it's down to us to determine where we will go. And I, for one, say enough is enough, and it's time to think forward and think about how we can transform the future. We can start to heal the divide amongst the people and start to put things right. So this is me, Dan Astin-Gregory, reporting for the Pandemic Podcast, marching with the people here in London, taking to the streets in Wandsworth area now, I believe. The traffic has come to a standstill behind us. Many of them in support of the movement here. Really positive reception. I'm going to sign out now for a moment to take a break, but I'll be back shortly for the next phase of the protest. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for sharing. And if you haven't already subscribed, please just take a moment to go to danjgregory.com/pandemic, join our mailing list, and keep up to date with our latest broadcasts, our interviews. Over 300 episodes so far in the last 12 months. Reached 6 to 7 million people with our broadcast so far, and just warming up. So here's to you, here's to the future. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace and love.